welcome back to Kale Kids and Chaos. We have a special episode for our podcast today. We have a guest today that we're going to get right into. We're going to be talking about campus eating. Kids, say high school, maybe college age, heading off to college age, what goes on when they get to campus. And for the first time in their lives, they are responsible for their own care and feeding and what really happens. And our guest today, I'm so glad we have Jane Reagan, registered dietitian and certified eating disorder specialist. Jane and I go back a few years. We're both here in Boulder, Colorado, and have known each other for a little while. And I'm just thrilled to be able to rope her in. She's about to leave on a fabulous vacation, so we got her right
Just
before
before.
that. And Jane, tell us about your background.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. So happy to be here with you guys. Um, I have been in the field, well, it feels like forever, but probably the last 15 to 20 years. I'm a registered dietitian, certified eating disorder specialist, and I've just, how did I get in the field? I guess I've always loved the nutrition field, but equally loved the psychology field and mental health. And so I also have my master's in counseling and really love that intersection of nutrition and mental health for people of all ages, right? For kids, adults, elderly, um, and have a real affinity for the college age student too, because I worked at the University of Colorado Boulder for 10 years, which is just right up the street from me, and worked with college kids, of all sorts of ages, but many of them between the ages of 18 and 22. And just saw their everyday struggles that are very real, and really how they are for many kids across college campuses. Although the atmosphere and kind of the vibe of it, every campus is a little different, but there are some similar threads definitely throughout the U.S. that college students struggle with. And so I saw this when I worked on campus. I see this in my office, and because of this, one of my 3 online programs is one for college students.
Right. And
Like,
we want to make sure, I want to mention right now, you can go to janereagannutrition.com and see all the amazing educational things you've put up for people, the resources you've created, the programs you've created. And to be more specific, you worked at the Wardenburg Health Center on the CU campus, which is where students would go, right, for healthcare and nutrition counseling. So you were right there in the trenches working
yes,
with, yeah. Hmm.
in the thick of it through COVID,
Yeah,
um,
right.
which was interesting in itself. But yes, I saw students of all ages and all situations, whether they were, moving away from home and living in the dorms for the first time and trying to figure it out, or whether they were now living off campus and they've never had to actually go grocery shopping and make meals, and some students have food allergies and other health conditions that were kind of chronic and they had to deal with. And some students were graduate students and married with kids, right? There are all these different scenarios, and how do you figure this out? And then some students were really food insecure and didn't have the money, and what does that look like? And so there was just so many different scenarios that I was lucky enough to be able to see and interact with students, to
And
help
you,
them improve their nutrition.
right. And you've really rounded out your training. You've got training in the functional side of, like you talked about that intersection with psychology and counseling and food. That's huge around food. And that's right, kind of what we want to get right at today.
Yeah, especially we work with a lot of kids in high school and college who struggle with focus and ADHD and could be nutrient deficiencies, but whatever it may be, depression, anxiety, their mental health was being impacted. And we looked at like, what can we do with their nutrition? And in fact, before I left the university, I gave a talk to all of the psychiatrists and psychologists to say, like, what looks like depression, what looks like anxiety, may well be and may benefit from medication, but it also might be, a lack of overall calories, a lack of protein, really inappropriate meal timing, nutrient deficiencies. Like, their eating and their food intake made such a difference. And I just wanted providers to look at that and have that be a piece of the puzzle, or the pie that they're seeing of this student. Because I saw all the time that people's mental health was improved by changing their diet,
Just with
right?
food and
There's
right. And
Yeah.
as always, we have Therese Nadler here, registered dietitian as well. Of course, we need to make sure I mention that. And Therese, you've got a younger child yourself, and you've got a
Yeah.
lot of peers with younger kids, and this must feel like,
So
light,
far off,
light years
so hard
away.
to imagine. Because they're 6 and 7, so it's hard to imagine them being self-sufficient. But I remember,
Right.
Jane, even to what you're saying, I think I don't know. I can't speak from a parent's perspective, but I remember just as like a kid who was like totally fine, no allergies, self-sufficient, getting to a big campus. I went to University of Michigan, and just the radical overhaul in lifestyle that you experience. When you first get to college, like you have no problems skipping meals or skipping classes, drinking your calories, eating late at night, making poor decisions around food choices, because there's no like guardrails there. There's no mom around to be like, hey, have you had your vegetables today? And like I said, I was like a pretty knowledgeable. I've always been interested in nutrition and health, so I was aware of what I should be eating, even if I wasn't choosing to do that.
Yeah.
And then I think, just the idea of, the freshman 15, at least that's what it was when I went to college back in 1997. I don't know if that still exists today, or if it's more or less. But I imagine, and all of this really does, I think the knowledge and awareness we have today as a society around how food really impacts how you feel is obviously, there's a lot more,
Hmm.
people are aware of that. Whereas I think years ago, it was like, no, I'm just going to power through with my Red Bull and my pizza.
Yeah.
I'll be fine.
Oh my gosh, I have
Wow.
so much to say on this topic. First, I have to say go blue,
Oh, thank
because
you.
my youngest just graduated from the University of Michigan. So I went out
Oh,
to Ann
fun.
Arbor 3 times a year for the last 4 years.
Oh, I hope
Um,
he or she loved it as much as I
and
did.
one of my interns this last year was from the University of Michigan. And because I see so many college students, I thought it'd be really interesting to go onto college campuses. And so this last semester, I had 4 different interns. One was at University of Michigan, University of Colorado, San Diego State, and what was my other one? Cal Poly. And
Cool.
so they would go on and they'd ask the same question, and they'd videotape it, and it went up on my Instagram. Like we had 2 videos every week for the semester. And the question was, what behaviors, nutrition behaviors do you see on campus that are normalized that are actually quite unhealthy? And it was for men, women, and it was really interesting to hear their answers. And then what we did is we just created a compilation of it that's about to go out, to see, like, is there some thread across the nation that we see, right? Of
Huh.
That's happening on all campuses. And there were 4 things that we came up with. And the
Okay.
first one is that so many college students are skipping meals,
Mm,
right? And there might be different reasons for skipping meals, but many times it can be, right there. You talked about the freshman 15, or fear of weight gain. Uh, Maybe there is some food insecurity. There's all sorts of diet culture pressures that are being put
yeah,
on them.
social media today didn't have that back then.
Oh, no,
Yes,
and
and
that's
like,
got to be huge. Just that piece. And I'm thinking to myself, when I went to college, it was the freshman 10. It's funny that
right.
now it's 15. But
Creeping.
I think I pretty much started college a long time ago, and it was before the real rise of high fructose corn syrup was in everything. So it's interesting that it's changed to 15 from 10.
Well, and I will say something about that freshman 15. I think there is so much fear that's put out there, and so much pressure, that it's actually making things worse in some
Yeah.
instances. That young men, young women especially, are so afraid of it that they're restricting too much,
Yeah.
right? And then they're skipping meals. That's not the only reason. But skipping meals impacts their energy, right? Impacts their focus,
Yeah.
impacts their long-term health. But that was consistent across all the campus colleges, that the college campuses that we went to. The other one, the second thing that we found, was some of the cost and meal accessibility, like the culture of going out all the time, or maybe not eating in the dining halls because it's not a cool place to eat, or the dining halls are too far away, right? Or
Getting
late
everything
night.
delivered whenever you want it, if you're willing to do, DoorDash or Uber
Yes,
Eats, right?
yes. A lot of late night eating, door
Mhm.
dashing, right? Like all of that kind of accessibility was so new. And when you're in high school and if you're eating at home and let's say you're having meals with your family or not, you're making your own meals, you don't have a whole dining hall in front of you, with just a plethora of desserts and different options. And like
Choices.
at the university here, it's a 900 person dining hall. It's enormous. And
Yeah.
so if you come into college not really having an understanding about nutrition or what your body needs, it can feel very overwhelming of like,
Right.
how do I know what to even choose? And so sometimes people shut down and don't choose anything, or other people, kind of feel like, oh my gosh, this is a heyday. I'm going to try everything, right? And
Yes.
both extremes are not really helpful for them.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and the third one that we found was the overuse of caffeine,
Mm.
right? Kind of what you said, the Red Bull, the
The Red Bull, the cold brew, there's like all different levels now of
right.
caffeination that did not exist years ago.
And the meal replacement, like instead
Yeah.
of having a meal, I'm just going to have a coffee.
Yeah.
And it is an appetite suppressant, right?
Right.
And so that's why people often go to it. And that same dose that they had at one point, now you need a higher dose to get the same effect. And
Yeah.
and I've seen time and time again where caffeine causes anxiety. And I've seen people
Yes.
where they have like 1,000 milligrams of caffeine in a day. I know that sounds crazy,
Right. And
but
then it affects your
it can.
sleep patterns,
It's
you know what
not
I
hard to,
mean? Your
right? And
cortisol.
it's
Yeah.
pretty easy to get to 1,000 milligrams. If you drink 2 or 3 cups of, coffee, and then later you have Red Bull, and it,
Yeah, like all the sodas, like
it
it's
doesn't take
in,
long,
yeah, yeah,
right?
it's
Well,
in a
and if
lot.
you look at people, a lot of people don't realize this, but drip coffee has more caffeine than espresso shots. So
Right.
if you go to Starbucks and you get a Venti, their largest drip coffee, that's over 400 milligrams of caffeine.
Wow.
Right? It's
Yeah.
pretty easy to get that. And
Right.
so many of the students that we interviewed talked about, right, these caffeine habits and like the impact that it had on them. And then the fourth one was really issues that pertain to body image and sometimes over exercising. And depending where you were in the campus or in the country, it was a little bit different, right? But the pressure to have a certain body. So working at the university, I can't tell you how many students I talked to that would be from another state. They came from Minnesota or North Carolina or Washington, and they would say, "Oh my gosh, I thought I was in such good shape until I came to campus."
Welcome to
And
Boulder.
I'd have to reframe like, "Yeah, no, you're doing great." It's like that each campus has kind of their vibe. And sometimes, and on all campuses, I think there is that pressure to be a certain body size. And then sometimes that can lend itself to over exercising, right? Where like an hour of exercising isn't enough. You have to do 2 hours, right?
Yeah,
Or I have to look a certain way for spring break, or I have, right? Like, and part of it is that age range where you're meeting so
sure.
many different people and
Yeah.
having these experiences, and people want to look their best, and all that makes sense. But it can be taken just to an extreme and really be problematic for students.
What
Yeah.
would you say, Jane, would be, can you give a typical example of the breaking point? Like, what would bring a student or a young adult into your office now or while you're on the campus? What would they come in finally saying, like, oh, I need help because, like, what would be the trigger for them?
Right. So some kids come in and they really know, right? Like, oh, I've been struggling with this back home and or now it's started again, or um and other people would come under the guise of something else and it would kind of unfold in session what else is going on, right?
Yeah.
Or like say they came in and they're really foggy headed and their energy's terrible, right? And they don't know why. And then as you start to talk with them, you find out, right, that they're skipping meals or they're not eating very many carbohydrates, right? Carbohydrates are bad in their
Yeah, yeah,
mind.
yeah.
And
Keto,
yet they're walking on
paleo,
the
right.
campus, right? A lot of the campuses are large, and
Big.
it's not uncommon to walk an hour every day. Or they're losing weight, they don't know why. Well, they're actually getting this extra activity. And so you say, what was the breaking point of like someone coming in? Is
Mhm.
usually that they their mental health or their physical health is really deteriorating. And I've seen kids who had really good eating habits before they went to college, and then the pressures and the comparisons and the expectations really throw them off, and they start restricting. or they start going to the gym so much. And along with, the class load, the academics, the pressure, sometimes
Yeah.
it's hard making friends, finding, roommates to live with the next year, like all the pressures. And it just becomes too much. And someone along the line, maybe it's a doctor, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a friend, says, maybe you should check out your nutrition. And sometimes it's easier for people to go talk to a nutritionist than a therapist, right? It seems a little bit more acceptable. But the interesting thing is that so much of what I do, right, and nutritionists do, is really about behavior change and, you
Therapy.
know, and
Like in the
therapy.
big
And
picture. Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Right.
because food is never just about food,
Yeah.
right? And yet every day we have to eat multiple times a day. And so really working on developing a good relationship with food is so important. And yet there's all these pressures of eat this and don't eat that.
Hmm.
And try this diet or use this to maximize your muscle. I think probably one of the number one requests or questions I got when I was at the university was, how do I gain muscle and lose fat?
Right.
Sure.
Or how do I lose weight for someone that didn't even need to lose weight?
Right.
Right. And
Um,
do you know, do like most universities have like dietitians like that do what you do? Like I'm trying to think back to like when I was at school, it was
yeah,
years ago, but like I mean, I'm sure they
Mine
do, but
didn't.
like,
Mine
like
definitely did not at the
yeah,
time.
I think it's true. Way back when they didn't have that, but
yeah,
now universities are having them, and
yeah.
more for sports teams too.
Sure. Yeah.
But at health centers, and some
Yeah.
universities have eating disorder teams.
Interesting.
Right, like the where I worked had one, and some don't. Right? And then students have to go in their community to try to find one. And
Which is like
one
a
of the
whole
things,
other organizational challenge to try to find a resource off your campus. Yeah.
Right.
yes.
Yeah.
And so the college video workshop that I have online is really for college students to determine if there is a problem, because so many behaviors are normalized that are not normal. Even
Yeah.
like purging food, like that almost is normalized.
Let's
Um,
tick through those. Can you tick through some of those? Like what would you want anyone listening, parents or students to know? Whoa, that's a flag. That's not great.
right. Yeah, so one of the misunderstandings I think about healthy eating is that healthy eating is always eating less,
Right.
right? Or less carbohydrates, or less grains, or less of this, rather than like really eating to fuel your body to function your best, to be optimal, both,
Mhm.
emotionally, mentally, physically. Um, and then I'd hear students say, well, I'm just not hungry, right? And sometimes the caffeine will blunt their appetite, but I will work with students on intentional eating, right? So throughout their day, figuring out what their day looks like. And it's really important to put food in throughout your day, because the most common pattern of eating that I saw and see is that people tend to undereat during the day, that leads them to be really hungry at night, and
Right.
even binge eating. And so they're labeling this as, oh, I don't have any control over food. See, I can't eat pizza, I eat the whole thing. And it really is like a mislabel. It's almost like they're just what I call makeup eating.
Right.
That like,
You're
okay, if you've
hungry.
only eaten 20% of what you need and you get to 4 or 5 in the afternoon, you're going to be really hungry.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, I mean, one student I thought of, he was a, a graduate student. He was 6'2". He was a really strong guy, and he wouldn't eat all day, and then he'd binge all night. And um, he was able to switch it around so quickly by just getting up and having breakfast in the morning, having lunch, having a snack, having dinner. But what was really hard is that first day or two, when you get up after you've eaten all night, you get up, you're not hungry, right? So you're
Right.
like, I don't
Yeah.
want to eat, because I know how much I eat at night. If I eat during the day, my worst nightmare is gonna come true. I'm gonna gain weight, and that's what I don't want to have happen. But I said, okay, let's just try it for one day. And so he got up, he wasn't hungry, he ate breakfast, and it was this balanced breakfast. Got and then had lunch, and then had a snack, and got to dinner, and he was like, this light bulb went off, like this aha moment, like, oh my gosh, I'm not even that hungry. Like, yes, I want some dinner, but I don't feel ravenous, like I'm just
Ravenous.
going to devour everything in front of me. And so really learning what our body needs and like eating throughout the day and fueling ourselves and really not having those, good food, bad foods. I mean, yes, there are foods, highly processed foods, right, that don't have the nutrients that our bodies need and really are like void of, and excess calories. But sometimes people go too extreme, something called orthorexia, where they'll only let themselves have healthy foods. And the downside of that is that it becomes very perfectionistic, right? And the truth is, we do have those foods out there. We do have candy or cake or, some treats that we like, ice cream. And so how are we going to learn to navigate that? Like having this all or nothing, unless you have a true food allergy and you can't have it, the all or nothing mentality doesn't work very well long term. It seems like it
Right.
works well short term because it's like taking care of the anxiety, but there's always going to come a day where you want that food. And
Sure.
so
Or you want to be part of a social something event
Right, that's
that,
yes,
happening.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So what would you say, maybe you could give a couple examples. We kind of touched on it, on how you saw this affect young people's capacity to just function during the
yes,
day. Like even,
yeah. One of
GPA even, or
oh,
did
yes,
they have to drop out of a sport activity or keep it?
all of those things.
Hmm.
I remember one girl I met with, and she was one of the highest in the engineering program, which had a lot of men in it. And she decided, or her roommates decided, that they were going to go on a diet and they wanted her to join her. And so she did. And she lost about 20 pounds, and her grades that were A's dropped down to C's and D's. And that's when she'd come in to see me. And she was so upset about it. And she didn't really realize it was tied to her eating. And when we kind of figured this out and then changed her eating, she was able to gain the weight, feel so much better. She brought her grades back up, and she was like, I am never doing that again.
Right.
And so sometimes there is that light bulb moment, right? But other times it takes longer to kind of
And
figure that out.
Therese, you and I have so often talked about that in littler kids. In my practice, what I would see happen to kids do 180s in elementary school, junior high, with, in those cases, the moms were doing kind of the orthorexia thing on their families unwittingly, well intended, but so restrictive, and their kids just didn't have enough to eat, and they
Yeah.
would lose their growth patterns, and they would lose their functioning. I had a little boy who was 10 who was a special needs guy, and he had a lot of challenges, but one of them, sadly, was he couldn't keep dry at school. He had a lot
Oh,
of wetting and he couldn't write. As soon as he got more food, he was dry, and he
yeah.
started writing, and he started initiating tasks. His whole diagnosis changed, and it was just from food. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear how much that also affects people when they're 20, right? Or 18.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, like the impact, I think, to what both of you are saying is like, I definitely remember growing up, there was one family who ate super healthy, but the minute those kids had play dates at other people's houses, they were in the pantry, like, what do you got? You know what I mean? And I have to imagine that this behavior like follows them probably into college to some degree, because the minute you have like that freedom where like you can have quote unquote junk food, whatever it looks like, you know what I mean? If you were not allowed to have that as a kid growing up, you end up on that cycle where you ricochet, I think.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with parents who, well-meaning, that
Right.
they kept healthy foods in their house, but wouldn't allow any sugar
Yeah.
or any chips or any, and yet these are the kids that were then going out and having so much of it elsewhere and didn't know
Yeah.
how to normalize that. Like
Yeah.
instead of, you know, an amount of chips, a couple handfuls, right? They were eating the
Right.
whole bag
Backfires. Yes,
and
totally.
it
And even to this
backfires.
day, as an adult, I remember this from growing up. Like we have what I call the candy drawer. So anytime I was a 7-year old, so anytime you have a birthday party, a holiday, like you get a lot of candy inevitably. And so we keep the candy drawer. Like I'll take the candy, whatever we get, put it in the drawer. And occasionally my son will go over and be like, oh, I feel like, something small, and we'll negotiate what he can have. But like when other kids come over, they know that candy drawer and they just like are in there. Like,
Yes,
you know what I mean? And I have to like get involved and it has, but like I do think there is something to be said where like if you allow kids to have access, they learn to regulate. Whereas if it's restricted
yes.
completely,
It's
that's me just
harder.
it
Yeah, and they need
backfires
to
often.
learning that discernment is
Yeah.
necessary. And that's so big when you're going to college because you're going to need that also,
Yeah.
not just for food, but for drinking and
Oh,
alcohol
yeah.
and drugs. And that's a whole other topic. And so it's so
Mhm.
interesting to see you've really seen 180s. You've seen crashes and burns and then recoveries just from food.
Absolutely. And
Mhm.
from moderate caffeine, like lowering caffeine if we need to, looking at like alcohol intake,
Mhm.
um, and see people feel so much better. Um, the other thing that is created with like this restrictive eating and all this control around food, it can be isolation.
Yeah.
And which is really hard when you're in college because if you're a student who's just gone 2,000 miles across campus and you don't know anyone, you're trying to make friends and let's say your coping skill is really restricting your food and not eating and then not wanting to go out with your friends to the restaurant or not wanting to have pizza late at night or and it becomes kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy where you're isolating yourself and yet then you can't connect with people and then you don't want to because you don't want to eat food. And so um, that's also something I would see students come in with this isolation.
And
Um,
that must kind of get bigger now that there are all these Uber Eats, Grubhub, all these things where kids can order in to their dorm room and
yes.
just kind of isolate. Maybe they're
Yeah.
eating, but maybe
Yeah.
they're not eating right, but they're isolated, which is
Yes.
not great either.
No.
And I feel like that could sometimes happen, right? Because like some kids like naturally on the weekends could sleep until noon. And then you have other kids whose
Yes.
chronological clock is just like I'm up at 8. You know what I mean? But you're like, "Oh, but all my friends sleep till noon and who am I going to go have like lunch with or brunch with or whatever?" So,
And
there's some of
that
that
is
I think too.
that's one of the challenges in college that you might not find at other times in your life is that your schedule is so haphazard.
Yeah.
You have one day when you're up for your 8 o'clock class, and then the next day you're sleeping in because you don't have class till noon. And then Friday night you're out till 3, and then you're sleeping in till, 2 the next
Yeah.
day. And so you don't have this like, okay, I get up and I have breakfast at 7, I have lunch at 12, I have
Right. The
snack, I have dinner at
structure,
6.
it's a lot
Right.
looser. Yeah.
And that structure, when you do have that, lends itself to understanding your hunger and fullness signals, to kind of trust around food. But when you're all over the place, it's harder. So what I tell students is that no matter when you get up, whether you get up at 7 or you get up at 10 in the morning, you get up at 12, have breakfast within an hour of getting up, right? Like start your day then because you've slept for, I don't know, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, and your body needs food. It needs fuel and then kind of work from there. And usually I will tell students like don't go longer than 4 hours without food, right? And people will think that, oh, well, I should really not eat if I'm not hungry, of course, right? That sounds like it makes sense, but it can backfire because if you then go 8 hours without food, all of a sudden you're starving and like your caffeine
Right.
wears off.
Bad
And
decisions ensue.
yeah, it's better to be
Yeah.
a little bit more preventative,
Right.
have a snack, don't go long periods of time without eating during the day when you need that
Mhm,
fuel.
mhm.
Cool.
And let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned food insecurity for some students.
Mhm.
And I saw a statistic that a lot of kids are food insecure on college campuses, like
Yeah.
25% than one of the
Wow.
things that I saw. And that's a lot. And you wouldn't think that because they're like, well, they can afford to go to college. Why aren't they able to buy food? But it sounds like you worked with some of those kids too. And what kind of resources
Yeah.
would you share with them?
Well, yeah, when I was there, we had actually like a little pantry down
They
where my
could pick
office
from.
was.
Yeah.
And students could come in and they could get what they wanted. There are local, you know,
The food share.
resources,
Hmm.
the food shares that they can go to. I had one student I'll never forget came in and she had $50 a week to spend. And this was probably 5 years ago. So
Wow.
that's $7 a day.
Oh man.
And we had
Hard.
to figure out together, like put our heads together. Okay, we got to make this work. Let's figure it out. And I had her go around and she was very motivated. She was darling. And she price shopped at every place in our town from like Whole Foods to Target and for our grocery store, Safeway, King Supers, um, Natural Grocers, Sprouts, Trader Joe's, and to find out which place was the cheapest. I don't know if
And that's
anyone
a
has any
huge
idea.
time sink right there.
Yes.
Just
Right.
getting all around town to price
Yeah.
stuff.
Do you have any idea which one was the cheapest?
I'm guessing Target or Trader Joe's.
No, I'm gonna guess natural grocers.
It was Trader Joe's.
Ah!
And
I will say I shop at Trader Joe's and I leave with 2 bags and I feel like, all right, I have 2 bags. I go to the other ones and I leave with 6 items and I'm like,
so
wow, I
we
have
had to,
nothing for a lot of
yeah,
money.
we had to figure out, okay, she can't go out and have coffee, right? Think that's like five
Right.
Yeah.
dollars,
Oh
That
yeah.
right? You have to
easy,
make your
easy
coffee at
five
home. You have
bucks.
to
Yeah, for
get,
sure.
things like beans and rice and potatoes and
Basics. Yeah.
um yeah, like your basics, and make big batches of it.
Yeah.
And she was able to do it, but it is a very stressful thing that often goes unnoticed.
Yeah, for
Right.
sure.
So that's an important message here too, is if anyone listening is hearing that, there's resources to look at for sure. I'm sure they vary. Of course, they will vary based on where you are in the country, but
Yeah.
usually there is at least here what we would call a food share or food bank or places like that, at least. Lots of
Yeah, and
resources
check in
around.
with your some of your campus resources,
Hmm.
right? Because the campuses usually have either something there within the college, or they will have places where you can go. I also want to mention, like, I know we're talking about students, but the other group that's impacted when kids go to college are parents.
Hmm.
And I would talk with a lot of parents who were very concerned, right? And just terrified when their child wasn't doing well, if they weren't eating, if they were losing weight, um, their mental health was declining, not knowing what to do.
Right.
Um, and that's there's a help out there for parents too. And some students end up, kind of talking to their parents, but other students and other parents are pushed away, right? And aren't included on releases of information about medical health and, psychological
Oh
health. And
gosh, right. That's so true. I mean, once your child is 18,
Mhm.
you're out. You are locked out.
Yes,
You're out
yes,
unless they
yeah,
remember to sign something saying that you can speak to their providers.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
And so one of my online programs is for parents. It's called the Eating Disorder Recovery Roadmap for Parents. And it's 9 pre-recorded modules and about 50 handouts. But I think the most important part of the program is the weekly live group Zoom calls. So I have parents that hop on from all over the US. And very similar, like, it's really great support for parents when they realize they're not alone,
Mhm.
and that there are things that they can do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
It's got to be
important.
so tough as a parent to navigate that, like
Yeah,
so
and
tough.
and college is not like how it was when we were there. It is different. Like, we did not have social media.
Right.
And as I was at the university, when did I join? The 2011 to 2021, like, I could see the difference in how social media
I'm
was
sure.
impacting students. And in fact, I had a high school student in my office the other day, and it was remarkable because she had never had social media.
Really?
And it was so interesting talking to her. Just, I was asking her about her food, and she was like, I love ice cream. And a lot of students will be like, oh, I love ice cream, but I shouldn't eat it. Right? There's always that but. And she just had no buts about anything. She didn't know, like, what was a good food, what was a bad food. She just it made me think, right, about, like, how much we're all impacted by what we
Oh,
hear. And
and
there is so much.
it's just ramping up faster every week. It
Mhm.
feels
Yeah.
faster and more frenetic. And yeah, so that's a
Yes.
huge impact on campuses now.
Yeah, and so how do we help our kids? How do we help students? When there's so much information out there, there's so much inaccurate nutrition information and body information. Um, and it's so easy to go along with what you hear, like, oh, all the things out there on TikTok and Instagram of what I eat in a day, and eat this and
Oh,
don't
all
eat
the
that.
people I get asked all the time. Have you heard about this one or that one on TikTok or Instagram? What do you think of this person, their platform, what they're saying?
Mhm.
Like all the time. Yes.
And so it's really about, like, how do you critically look at what you're seeing and the information you're getting. And what I'll tell parents is just see if we can start that conversation, not with any judgment toward what their child is seeing, but just, like, out of curiosity, like, well, what did you think about that when you saw that ad? Or how did that make you feel? And kind of noticing what the norms are at their university, and are those norms really in their best interest. Like it might be a norm to not eat lunch. That is in high schools. I see it all the time. None of the girls eat lunch. That's kind of
Hmm.
extreme. I don't want to say none, but a lot of girls will not eat lunch. And that is kind of the norm, right? And then
Hmm.
how do you fight
What
against
do
that
they
if
Yeah,
what
what
do
do they
they
do
do?
instead?
What
Or
do they
like,
do?
is that just for like to stay thin? Or like, what is the rationale for it? Yeah, okay, got it.
Oh,
Mhm.
wow.
Wow.
And so, just because it's a norm doesn't mean that it's really in your best interest.
Yeah.
And then, like, again, having that conversation with your child, like, well, God, how does that feel? Like in this situation, what happens if you're hungry at lunch and no one is eating? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
what do you
Well, it's
think you
so
should
interesting
do?
in the area of Boulder I live in, as you know, Jane, in South Boulder, and we've got a big high school here. And if you happen to head down to the supermarket and all that, um, you'll just see gobs of kids walking from school to go get, I guess, Starbucks or whatever. But I've always thought that takes a lot of time. How do they do that and walk back? And it's interesting to walk in there at that time of day and just sort of notice what they're all buying. And it's mostly absolute garbage, but they're having fun. But I guess it's a little bit of that experimentation. They're out on their own, they're learning,
Yeah.
but they're definitely not eating
And
stuff that's going
And
to
that's
help them.
normal, right? Like that
Right.
experimentation, we want kids to be able to have that, like try these foods. Sometimes, I've had clients where they don't eat a certain food because it's supposed to, it's bad for you, but they don't even know if they like it or not. And
Right.
like when we do start getting exposure to all these different foods, I mean, I've had comments where like, you know what? I don't even really like that. I don't like cookies, and I always thought I wanted cookies, but it was only because I kept it off limits. Um, and so giving kids the tools and the strategies and knowledge to make their own decisions for their body. Like, well, how does that make you feel if you just have candy after school? Or I had a high school student who really literally was having candy throughout the whole day. That's all her diet was. And
Wow.
so we're like, okay, well, let's just see what would happen if we put some real food in, right? Like, I just want you to notice, like, okay, how is your thinking? How's your energy? And so, not saying like candy's bad, but just like really trying to connect to how does this make you feel in these different ways? How are you sleeping at night? And so she could start to notice, like, oh, wow, okay, I had more energy after lunch in my classes. I wasn't just, taking a nosedive. And sure enough, by the end, it wasn't that she never had candy, but probably 80% of the time she was eating real foods. But
That's
if
huge.
she would have been told like don't ever eat candy, right? That's the worst thing that you can have. Like our human nature is we kind of want the thing that we're not supposed
Yeah.
to have. And like instead, let's just try to normalize it a little bit and also learn how to eat in a way that really gives you the optimal physical energy, mental health.
Right.
Other than another question I have for you, Jane, is other than, we talked a little earlier about the thing that gets someone over the hump to address this while they're in college and they're trying to navigate and coordinate and organize their lives in this new environment. Do you ever see kids just get hooked because the campus is all over providing really amazing food? And I noticed as I was preparing for this that a lot of campuses are getting competitive around that. And they're really getting into farm to table and local source. And we talked about this a little bit. I saw this at my son's college years ago, which was coastal. And I mean, they had their own aquaculture. They fresh scallops, fresh lobster, and they have a
Wow.
commitment to sourcing a certain percent of their food within a certain radius of miles. So, does that ever hook students, or are they kind of like, just too busy? It's not relevant for them.
Um, is that like the main reason they're going to a school? Probably not, but it is an influence for sure, right?
And then it
And
hooks the
maybe for
parents.
parents,
You
right?
know,
Yeah,
the
For
parents
parents,
care.
parents love it.
yeah, to know like, wow, my child who's going to be in the dorms and eating up, the dining halls, that there are good options for them.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
like, at CU, they have hydroponic gardens in one of the dining halls, and there are great food options. The interesting thing is, I would still have students come in and say, I can't find anything to eat, which I always thought was interesting.
What are they looking for, I wonder?
I don't know. There was a sushi station, there was like a Mexican, a Persian station, there was everything you would want. right? And then that would always be a little tip off to me, like, you know, what else is going on here?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's just touch, I want to touch a little bit on all the things you've created. Tell us
Mm.
about that a little bit. I want, like, you've got, which would you start with? You've got like a
Well,
great menu
I,
of stuff.
well, there are three online programs. The first one was, as I had said, the Eating Disorder Recovery Roadmap for parents. And so people can buy just the modules and handouts, or they can also have the weekly Zoom calls included, which I think is really the big benefit.
Right.
And if you can't make it on a week, that's fine. Like I send out a recap of what we talked about, which parents love. But really the parents get to know each other, and it is such a great support for them. And they can stay into it up to a year. Because
And
when I
so
first started
that,
it, it was for 4 months, the Zoom calls, and then realized like we were just rolling up our sleeves and just kind of getting into it. And they're like, can we make this longer? And so
wow.
now it's for a year. And then after that, last year I created this workshop for college students. And it was really like not about how to heal or improve your relationship with food or kind of get yourself on the path to recovery if you are struggling with disordered or eating disorder, but more about how to recognize it. So this workshop is like looking at what is normal eating, what is a bad habit, what is disordered eating, and what is an eating disorder. And, if you feel like you're struggling and you're in college, what is your next step? Right? Like, how do you get help? And so it's just helping students to recognize what's going on. And then from that program, I realized that, you know what, there's nothing out there on the prevention of eating disorders. And
Right.
so last month, I just have, let's say, 2-hour workshop all on how do you prevent eating issues, disordered eating, eating disorders. So whether you're a high school student, college, you're in your 30s, you're in your 60s, there's people all throughout the life, span that have eating disorders or struggle with disordered eating or have always been like sucked into the diet culture or always has been on someone who's been on a diet their whole life and they just don't really know how to navigate out of that. And so that is the third program on how to prevent this and what to
That's
do.
fantastic. And I mean, that's wonderful. And there, you must have some pearls in there for parents too, of younger kids. We've touched on some of that here, like not over restricting, not labeling food good, bad, and letting kids learn kind of a little bit the hard way, like how does it feel? And that's something I used to do in my practice as well, as even with little kids and ask, well, how do you feel? What does it feel like?
Yeah.
How do you feel? And we would talk about focusing on exactly what you said, Jane, thriving, making your body feel good, doing the things you like to do. And I think that's a big message for
Mhm.
anyone going off to college. It's such a huge, it's a huge leap into a new chapter, and you want to feel good. You want to feel good, and you want to experience the stuff you like, and you want to enjoy it, and you need food to do it. You just do.
And
I think.
and one of the populations that we haven't really talked about are athletes,
Oh,
right? At
yes.
college and high school and kind of this, it's called REDS, relative energy deficiency in sports, where someone is not having enough food to maintain their energy needs in their sport. And so they become very lean, too lean, right? It
And
has a
they're
lot of
not
implications on
performing.
their hormones and they're not performing as
Right.
well. And so there are times when clients don't really want to acknowledge, that they have an eating issue. Denial is very big, but sometimes I can kind of come through the back door with sports nutrition and talk about, okay, well, you're really good at your sport, and let's make sure that those stress fractures heal and
Right.
that you're getting the nutrition that you need and for better recovery and better performance. I had a woman that I worked with, and she was a world-class runner, and she'd fallen into anorexia and had to completely stop running. And of course, in running, there's always this thought of like, oh, I don't want to weigh too much. I want to be very lean. And she ended up weight restoring about 25 pounds, was able to get her period back that she didn't have, and had her personal best in Portugal when she went over there, by being stronger and fitter, right? And really using food. She'd eat 3 meals and 3 snacks every day. And she never thought she could do that before. And so the athletes out there, whether you're a recreational athlete or you're at your college, right? And you're a serious college athlete, nutrition can really make a difference.
Oh gosh, oh, a huge, huge, huge difference. And in working with younger kids, teens, high school kids myself in the past, telling both the child and the parent, we're talking like you need north of 3,000 calories a day, or for example, and
Mhm.
that would be a shocker. They would be restricting all the time, and that's such a great barometer. It's like, well, how did your game go? How did you perform
Yes.
after eating? Yeah, really, really
And
important.
sometimes you can be really exact. Like I have someone who's on one of the teams at the university, and she's really good in her sport. And so we looked at like she'd have a tournament all day long and would be playing. And so how many grams of carbohydrates do you need, right? Like carbohydrates are going to help you. And we
Mhm.
figured it out. And so she had all these snacks that she made with the exact amount that she'd have snacks throughout the day, and she played so well. Her recovery was so good, like when we really dialed it in to give her what her body
Right.
needed.
Right. And we didn't even get to touch on, I know we're kind of wrapping up here, but all the different diets that,
Oh,
when we talk about athletes, the first thing that I would hear a lot about is ketogenic diets. And this big supposed promise that you will perform so superior if you're only on ketones. And not that there's
I
nothing to
never
that,
saw
but
that. I never saw people do well
right.
on low carbohydrate diets. In fact, I've seen people's moods just tank because well, I did a year training in amino acid therapies for mental health,
Mhm.
and carbohydrates as a whole more readily increase serotonin, the neurotransmitter that makes us feel happier, more
Good.
relaxed, a little bit less depressed, whereas protein increases more your dopamine, which is what ADHD medication or caffeine increases. It makes us feel more focused. And so our mood really does, or our food really does impact our mood.
Absolutely.
For sure.
100%. Well, what did we miss today? Anything else that we've covered a lot in
Um,
kind of sort of a lightning round. But this has been really great to have you, Jane. I know we could talk forever
Oh,
about this.
yeah, no,
All
thank
fun.
you so much. I think this is a great topic for so many people out there, right?
Right?
And whether
Yeah.
you have a child or not, or maybe you know someone in college, or you remember the times when you were in college, or even later in your life, right? The struggles that people still have with food. It's such a common thing, right? That
Right.
we all
And
And I
talk
think it
about.
helps parents to know that like there are techniques for prevention. You know what I mean? Just based on like what you saw when you were in college or, things like that, that like there are things that you can do that can hopefully help your child, prevent ever going down a rocky path.
right.
100%. If there's not one thing I could say to parents is I would say try to listen more than you talk, right?
Hard
Like
to
really
do.
do. I know I'm a parent too. Because we so want to impart our wisdom, but it's so helpful to really listen and hear what their story is, what their experience is.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
usually how hard they're trying. For better or worse, they're endeavoring in some way. Well, this has been wonderful, Jane. Thank you. This is a great topic, and I feel like it's not one that gets a lot of air, kind of like everyone talks about babies, little kids, school kids, but this is huge. This is a big thing. And these habits that young adults, when they're emerging, are kind of putting into place.
Yeah.
Interesting. Maybe next time, if we do next time, we could talk about how those follow them into adulthood. And then the other
Yeah,
thing, too, when you're talking about a 19, 20, 22-year-old guy, he's not even done growing, really.
Right.
So
Right.
so we could get more into that too, like the differences for men, women, whatever. So there's more we could
for
talk
sure.
about.
And this is a kind of a hidden crisis on campus. Like
Yeah.
1 in 4 students, maybe 25%, will show disordered eating symptoms, but only 10% actually get proper help for
Right,
diagnosis or treatment. So it really is kind of an epidemic going around on out there that we don't realize.
right. It's a big deal, and it can really make or break a college experience completely.
For sure.
So I'm so glad to have you, Jane. Thank you. And
Yes. Thank
maybe
you.
we'll do it again. We'll have to come up with some more. There's
Round
always
two.
more. Yeah,
That
thank
would be
you.
great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Keep an eye on our YouTube channels. We will have more episodes coming up on different topics soon. All right. Take care, everyone.